All right, Amit, what happens when two Christians and a Muslim make a podcast?
They talk a lot.
That's a great answer.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so today we talked a lot about sort of the similarities and differences between Islam and Christianity.
The nature of evil, frequently asked questions about Islam, because there's so much divisiveness happening in the world. And we sat down with our buddy Ahmet, who is Muslim, and we were Christian. And it's so important to have these kind of conversations. I feel like I can't stress that enough. To come from a loving place, the two of us, or the three of us. Sorry, I just excluded.
Yeah, the two of us.
Yeah.
I'll see you guys. Tune in next time, I guess.
Hi, I'm Luke.
I'm Richard.
And this is the Spiritable Podcast.
We're having conversations about big spiritual, moral, and social issues in hopefully a more grounded way.
We talk a lot from the religious philosophy of this guy, Emanuel Swedenborg, and our own twist on Christianity. Check out episode 9 for more on that.
But of course, we don't have all the answers. So we like to bring on guests with their own philosophies.
Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, atheist, etc.
To help get new perspectives and to challenge each other's beliefs.
Everyone has some relationship with spirituality, but for some dumb reason it can be hard to talk about.
And everyone's experience with life is going to be a little different, and that's what makes it so interesting.
So, thanks for joining us on Spiritable. Hello, and welcome back to the Spiritable Podcast. We are here today with our friend. If you want to introduce yourself.
My name is Ahmet Selim Tekelioğlu, and I work for a Muslim civil rights organization here in Philadelphia. I'm an academic. My accent, I'm originally from Turkey.
When did you move?
I've been in the States since 2007.
Okay.
So I came for grad school to Boston. So I ended up focusing on how American Muslims establish their identity. As Americans, as Muslims, how do they negotiate these identities? And I had some additional research in Los Angeles, doing some more work in the interfaith scene over there. I mean, interesting turn of events.
Yeah, right?
Some dude from Turkey ends up doing this.
in a basement in Huntington Valley.
Well.
So Ahmed and I actually met doing a different project that we're working on, focusing around churches, synagogues, places of prayer, speaking out against domestic violence, which is a video that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be powerful. So that's how we met, and then you were very eloquent. You presented yourself well, so you're like, we got to get that guy on the podcast. Do you have any, I'm curious. Well, I do want to give a little disclaimer before we go too far. I do want to apologize to you or anyone who's watching if I accidentally say something offensive, because my natural curiosity, I just want to ask a lot of questions. And I want to be cautious about, cultural lines or anything that's insensitive. So I apologize before I even say anything. Just in case, because I do want to be careful about that, and I don't want to upset anyone on purpose, definitely, or accidentally. Disclaimer out there. Does that feel like it covers enough bases as a disclaimer?
I don't know what you're going to say. It's going to be awesome. I'm excited to hear it.
No, I don't have anything planned offensive. That'd be funny. No, that'd be bad. So I'd love to hear your path to your faith. If you always grew up Muslim, or if you kind of came to that, what's your faith path there?
No, I mean it's an a relevant question, because I was actually covering the other day in a presentation the religious sort of breakdown of adults in Pennsylvania according to Pew survey results. About 23% of Muslim Americans say that they no longer identify with their childhood religion, which was Islam, so they are no longer Muslim. Okay. I was born and raised in Turkey, which is a predominantly Muslim country. So I was born into a relatively sort of, practicing family.
Like conservative practicing?
Like those terms mean different things in the Turkish context. I'm being a little bit careful, but observant.
Praying 5 times a day.
Praying 5 times a day, kind of, family. So I actually grew up in a community that had come together on this shared idea of establishing a sort of observant, Muslim community. I sort of grew up with that. Like anyone else, I assume, I had, periods of, ups and downs and stuff like that. I think all along I've identified as a Muslim, as someone who tries to be as observant as he can. And now working in this sort of faith space is relatively new for me. I continue to work in academia separately, but now I work more closely with Muslim communities and different Muslim communities. I like working with people, that interactive aspect. One day I would be in a very African American Muslim community, next day in the Indonesian Muslim community in South Philly, and then I go and work in Lancaster. I do some work in prison, still in Lancaster. So these kind of things keep it interesting, chaotic and sometimes very stressful, but interesting. So,
I know when I'm like trapped behind a book or a screen on a computer for too long, I just feel useless after a while. It's really nice to have that sort of hands-on experience to be with people and affect things.
It helps keep things interesting.
You don't get bored.
And I feel like sometimes people in academia, I think it's a self-criticism that many people in academia do, this ivory tower sort of behind the table, sort of prophesizing about anything and everything. I feel like it keeps me grounded, and that's something that I try to cherish and try to learn from.
How's that working out for you, Richard?
Yeah, it's tough to stay grounded sometimes.
Because you're studying for how many hours a week, probably? 80?
Oh, this term, all of the hours in a week.
Yeah.
Are you in like grad school path?
Yeah, so I'm currently in the middle of a master's degree in divinity that looks toward ordination. So next year, if all continues to go well, I'll be ordained as a minister.
Yeah. But you have like a pastoral sort of element to it? Like, do you guys need to do like community work?
So there's experiential stuff that we do. I am just about to start doing visiting, so I visit different congregations around mostly the U.S. And then next fall I will be going for 3 months to a congregation to just be an assistant pastor in training and spend time with the congregation.
Do you get to choose where you go, or are you assigned somewhere?
Mostly assigned.
Wherever there's need. Huh?
So I will be going to South Africa in the fall, which I'm very, very excited about.
Wow.
It was...
We'll name drop a certain address so people can just stalk you.
People can just stop in. Stop in, guys.
All the podcast listeners.
Any podcast listeners in South Africa, I'll be there.
We'll come visit.
So I'm really excited about that. I'll be married at that point. I'm getting married this June, so my wife will go with me, which
Congratulations.
is awesome. Yeah, thank you.
It's like you're billing this as your honeymoon.
Exactly.
There you go.
That's nice.
I'm going to be without a host.
I don't know what you guys can do. Skype me in.
Also, we're always allowed to yell at Ben if he tries to talk.
Okay.
It's our running gag is that Ben's not allowed to talk during the show. Because he's behind the camera.
We'll have an episode with Ben on where we just put a bag over his head so no one knows what it looks like.
Just like a black screen in front of him.
Yeah, that's one of the things that that I wasn't used to before when I started this position. Is in this position I was asked also to do sermons. You don't have to be ordained or necessarily have a theological or seminary training to do that. Most mosques don't have full-time staff, so they will rely on community members to deliver these sermons on Fridays at the mosques. So I was asked whether I could do that when I started this position, and my first inclination was that can I choose not to? And they said it would be really good if you did, because that's a way for us.
You don't have to, but we really like it.
So I said, okay. While in school, like I was doing that sometimes in the university for the Muslim students, but now like every week I find myself in a different congregation and having to say something meaningful. In the sermon and lead the prayers, and that's a challenge. But this aspect is always challenging for me, because you feel like there are people over there looking at you, trying to not fall asleep, and you try to be relevant, and if you just do it for the young audience over there and try to drop like some popular vocabulary whatnot, what we call the uncles and the aunties, the elderly, they feel out of place. So it's a challenge.
It's hard to get everyone.
That's something. Yeah.
It is remarkable how much everything you said is just my whole life right now. It's incredible. I found a couple of times recently, there's been an idea I've been so excited about, and I'm very much a storyteller by nature. Like, it's hard for me to not tell people stories.
If Richard's starting to tell a story, and then you're like, oh no, you told me before. It is physically difficult for him not to finish.
It's because the story's not for you, it's for me.
I just love it. I'm like, Richard, no, I've heard it. Okay, yeah, but this one, no, Richard, I heard it though. And it's like, okay, well.
Yeah, maybe you should find alternative endings to your stories, and then go to like you don't know the end of this one,
but it's different this time.
Or find alternative beginnings. So by the time I recognize, it's already too late.
I've been hoodwinked.
That's true.
But yeah, it's so I found recently that there have been a couple different times where I've been really excited about something I've learned about or something I've read about, and I've gone to tell someone else, and when I get to tell them, like, this isn't very relatable. I don't know if you're going to be that excited about this. This is like a very strange, very specific, nuanced idea about like the nature of God and how he did something at this, and it's just like, it's cool, I promise.
Hard to keep that grounded.
Yeah, so it's learning to bring really ideas that I find really powerful to people whose job it isn't to just know this stuff as best as they can. And make it like a real life thing is probably the hardest part about
also
being a minister or delivering any sort of religious address.
And our church can get very intellectual very quickly and very technical and have a lot of very deep, nuanced things. So I think it's especially hard to relate some of those things. When you're in a master's program for 4 years learning all these intricate things, to relate it to someone who just found out about it last week, it's I feel for you there. It's a problem I don't have to deal with that much, thankfully.
Indeed.
But
in my experience, at least, a lot of people who attend the services, it doesn't mean that they don't care about the religion aspect, but they're also looking for meaning. They're also looking for community. And sometimes I feel like in the church setting, in the synagogue setting, in the mosque setting, that aspect can be lost if you don't provide enough of that element for the community, especially for the younger generation. A lot of the communities that I visit,
between instruction and community.
They report that once kids hit like high school age, it's difficult for them to be willfully coming to the mosque, because it's not as fun as something else.
Time of life.
So that challenge continues to be there.
It's been really fascinating to hear just how similar your experience with going to services is to mine. And I think that it's very easy with things that you're not familiar with to assume that it's just vastly different. But all of your stuff about like, people are falling asleep in their chairs, and the high schoolers don't really want to go anymore. I'm like, it's just
it's a Christian problem as well as a Muslim
connect
problem.
to that. So it's just it's really, it's so fascinating how easily people can just assume something is so different. And I think a lot of that affects the sense of discrimination that is happening in this country against a lot of just differences in general, but against your faith in particular. So do you have any experience with that? Like how present is that in your congregations, that sense of feeling discriminated against? Is that really present in all the congregations you go to, stronger in some than others?
Or for you personally?
I mean, unfortunately, because I work for a Muslim civil rights organization, every day we receive a lot of calls that sort of includes anything from workplace discrimination, right? So to give an example, someone says, hey, I started to decide to wear the hijab, the head covering, and now my employer is saying they are going to let me go. They're not saying it's because of this, but I fear
But,
religious
yeah.
discrimination. We receive a lot of calls and complaints from students complaining about discrimination or, Islamophobia, labels being thrown in the school environment, sometimes from students, sometimes from teachers. To give an example, a Philadelphia Muslim student, a girl, she goes to her counselor in a public school and says, look, I want to start considering and talking about, college applications and SATs, right? The counselor responds and says, hey, aren't you a Muslim? You're going to get married and stay home. Why are you worried about, SATs?
The counselor says that?
The counselor says that. So,
Yikes.
this is a case. Another case that I'm looking at is, between kids, right? So a lot of name calling happens, especially, terrorism, like, bomb explosion sounds and stuff like that is very common. And it's common in like districts or schools with a lot of resources and those with fewer resources. So yeah, it's a reality. And part of it goes to, there are a lot of stereotypes about, Islam, Muslims, terrorism, extremism, stuff like that. Yeah. Because it's very common in the media, right? Mm-hmm. So that doesn't surprise me. I don't find it necessarily problematic that people have question marks, that people have, even sometimes, stereotypes. What is sometimes very interesting to respond to is, this curiosity about, Islam, Muslims often starts with, okay, tell me that you are not a, terrorist, you're not an extremist, and then, we can talk. In like public exchanges around this, usually you first, are asked to respond to these kind of things, right? So as a Christian, like, nobody should or, does really sort of like say, hey, tell me that you're not a KKK kind of, Christian, and then, I can hear you out. So that's a challenge that many Muslims experience.
Well, this is also a great outlet to, if you want to dispel some stereotypes, you can just.
So that of course takes time and explanation and all, but Islam is considers itself a monotheistic, recognizes the prophets, and of course its core message is the same message of God consciousness and human beings being in earth to recognize and worship God, the only God, the creator. Allah in Arabic. I guess also important to say that Arab Christians also use the word Allah to refer to God, right? So it's not Muslim God,
right?
It's
God.
It's God.
I like that. Well, that's one reason I think having these kind of conversations are so important. Like having two Christians and a Muslim talk together, I feel like that's so needed today. And to show that we can have a very civil conversation and like each other and laugh and have a good time. Exactly. I feel like that in and of itself, even if we weren't talking about religion or spirituality, that in and of itself is important.
That is, and I especially love, what we call faith-based organizing, where people come together acknowledging their different faith paths, but they identify issues that are important to them and, coming together around them.
So when you're giving these classes and talks, is there a question that seems to be most frequent from people?
So people are burning to learn about like several themes, right? So is there anything in Islam that justifies like, oppression of women? Is there anything in Islam that justifies like killing of innocents, or why are these terrorists
violence sort of stuff?
Violence. Those are some of the common questions that you can see, like it's people are burning with those questions. But of course, and I find it normal, right? I don't necessarily find it problematic, but it of course structures the learning environment in such a way that you're like trying to say, okay, be patient, we'll come to that, but I don't want to start talking about a faith tradition first with a disclaimer saying that it doesn't condone terrorism.
Yeah.
It doesn't. But, starting, with that is strange. When we do those like 10 session things, we have like, separate sessions on women and Islam, on, violence in Islam and stuff like that, because it requires that attention and it requires that real engagement with it. But I'm saying too many buts. I usually choose to start with a historical experiential story. So that's why I like doing American Muslim history and experience sort of workshops and then getting to theology from there. Because I feel like it makes it more relatable for people and it makes it more human. First Muslims in America were slaves who were brought to America from the shores of Western Africa. Academic scholars say that about 1/3 of those slaves who were brought were Muslim. So starting from there all the way, like 18th, 19th century, then things change. With 1965, immigration quotas. In between, there is the spread of Islam among African American Muslims, with great migration and all. So that makes it relatable. Like now I'm doing a course, for example, at Temple University's OLI program. And in the beginning I said, look, bear with me, stay. I know you're curious about these things. We'll talk about them. But let's sort of, go through this and, we'll talk about it. And it makes it relatable to people because they see, like people in South Philly see their stories, people in different parts of the area see their stories and they can follow some of their personal histories in that.
I totally relate to that. I mean, even just in a Christian faith, there's so often where the moment I say I'm religious, even, or the moment I say I'm going to be a minister, people are like, oh, well, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't want to start a conversation about my faith with a clearly defensive listener.
Yeah.
That's not how I want to start. And also, there's so much that affect the specifics. And so it can be so hard to jump into very specific, hot button topics with someone that doesn't know anything about the broader background of your faith. And so I totally connect with that. And I think that's a brilliant way to start, because when you tell a story about people, it stops being like, oh, that thing that you've heard about, and starts being like, oh, I can connect with that experience.
And unfortunately, this kind of atmosphere is one where it's probably useful to tackle some of those things. I don't know, we just talked for a while about not wanting to jump into, Muslims' view on oppression of women or violence and terrorism. But I feel like that could be a useful thing to give a frequently asked question answer to for our audience. Because I bet there is someone out there, asking those burning questions. Sure. And as annoying as that can be for you, I think
it's never annoying. Right, but it's more like I welcome more personal interaction on those. Are there Muslims who are extremist terrorists? There are, unfortunately, right? Are they a minority
of
Christian
this
faith?
As well. So
are they a minority? They are a minority, right? So if you want me to talk about my faith, but ask me that, I don't subscribe to that, maybe 1% or less than 1%. I'll say, yeah, of course. I mean, I don't. It's easy, but it doesn't become very, very easy for the listener to get past it, because we all have, right? I too, we all have our biases. So we don't generalize when someone does something bad from within our group.
Yeah.
But when someone from outside of our group does something evil, we generalize it not to that individual, but to all of those people.
Yeah.
And I think that bias is something that we should all recognize and work on.
Well, I think it's something people are sort of blind to in their own faith too. Like Christians face a similar issue, to a lesser degree maybe, but I remember back during the Westboro Baptist Church, put a really bad name on Christianity, and it's easy for me as a Christian to be like, oh yeah, well that's not Christian.
Yeah.
But you know, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do.
And I think we all have the responsibility at least to recognize, these, and then, work in our communities on, countering that kind of discourse. But I feel like, that's something that often becomes rather challenging. In the case of, New Zealand, right? Next day, like, that sermon was very difficult for me, for example, right? So I had to go and then say something meaningful. We have a tradition of starting, these congregational prayers. The person who's leading, reminds the congregation that, pray with focus, pray as if this is your last prayer, because, we don't know when we'll die. Right? And, it became more real for very people personal. Because those people in New Zealand who had gone to the mosque to pray the Friday prayers, they were shot to death, right? And of course it then opens a lot of difficult
that makes me feel emotional just sitting right here. I don't know how that must have been.
And then of course there are difficult theological questions around why does evil exist and things like that, which usually comes later in that trauma period.
Maybe talking about the nature of evil and why that exists. I don't know. Actually, I took an Islam class back in college, so definitely not super knowledgeable, but it was good background. But I don't remember the Islamic answer to why does evil exist. So and that's relevant to a lot of the things that that happen today. Whether it's a bunch of Islamic people being killed, or some Islamic people killing people, or Christians doing the same thing. That's a relevant topic. So I mean, while you're thinking, Richard could probably give his answer to why evil exists from the New Church perspective.
Yeah, I could do that.
Want me to put you on the spot there?
Okay.
I mean,
it's fine.
Yeah.
This is what I'm training for. So a lot of this, there's so much. I mean, why does evil exist is such a huge topic. Yeah. So I think the big essence of why evil exists, from a New Church perspective, is this idea of freedom. And so our idea of God is we see God as all loving, all merciful. His goal in creating people is eternal joy through connection with each other and connection with him. And an essential of that is this idea of freedom. And this idea that freedom is what differentiates people from animals. People have the freedom to choose what they want to do. They don't just rely on instinct. They don't just rely on sort of sensory input and response. They don't just rely on punishment reward. They have freedom to make actual choices that they want to make. And because that freedom is essential to humanity, it has to be valued above the prevention of evil. Because if...
Also, I mean, you can jump in at any time and be like, no, wrong.
Yeah,
if you want
to.
So from the way I see it, if God didn't let evil happen, humanity would cease. In that, if every time someone was going to do a bad thing, God prevented it, people wouldn't be people. People wouldn't be free. People would be robots. And we can build little robots that never harm anyone, but no one calls them a person.
And God made people for a reason.
Yeah. And so this essence of humanity is this idea of freedom. And only in having the choice between good and evil and choosing good are we actually choosing good. If good is the only option, then no one really chose it. And no one can be a good person unless evil is a possibility. And so in sort of getting into the evolution of humanity, when people were created, it was important that they have a sense of self in things, a sense that they can do good things. We have an idea that all good is from God, which I think is a pretty prevalent faith idea, that everything good comes from your God.
Pretty much everything you said, I can say amen too. I mean, some, differences, nuances, but
and so when people were first becoming people, they had this slight idea, they connected with God, and they had this idea that things were from themselves. And that's sort of the origin of selfishness. The useful idea that things are from yourself that motivates you to want to do good, and then you can step back and be like, but I know that all this comes from God, and practice humility. But that sort of grew into selfishness as people were like, man, I really like that it feels like it's from me.
Yeah.
I wish it felt like it was from me even more.
Yeah. And then you start to cut God out of it.
Yeah, and so you start to distance yourself from God, and then you're like, well, if it's from me, maybe I can do something other than the right thing. And that's sort of how, from my faith, the historic dissension of humanity into selfishness happened. And that's sort of like the origin of the creation of evil, is just sort of little by little increased distance from God until eventually there's a full turn.
Yeah. And I think more like evangelical Christians would go back to the Adam and Eve story. Original sin is a term thrown around where, Eve picked the fruit, and then that was where evil came from, and humanity is constantly atoning for this original sin. So we're not really about that. Yeah, basically.
But an interesting thing about that story is that it is sort of an allegory for the fall of mankind. So the way we see it is that Adam and Eve weren't people historically. It's not about men and women or anything like that. They represent different parts of a person, and different parts of humanity historically. So it applies to like what happened and also what is happening inside us now. And this eating of the fruit is the original disobedience of God, thinking like, oh, it's good to know things. I like to know things. What if I knew everything?
Not even original disobedience, but like can happen to me right now.
Yeah.
Is there the element of Satan in the new church?
So Satan is another interesting concept.
I mean, like, is Satan like making them approach the forbidden fruit?
So the new church. Yeah, it's a great question. The new church doesn't believe in a singular evil entity. Basically, the power that is drawing us away from God is our own selfishness and the influence of hell, which is just
a lack of God.
Yeah, a lack of God, a congregation of people that chose to not love God, and so there are influences from heaven and hell at this point, but there is no like grand enemy in New Church theology. If there was going to be a grand enemy, it would probably be
within yourself.
Human selfishness, making ourselves God. I have a little misleading thing that I like to say, which is there's actually no such thing as atheists.
There's a misleading thing I like to say.
Yeah. But so
you're just talking about being your own God, and then you say misleading thing I like to say.
No, hear me out. The misleading thing I like to say is that there's no such thing as an atheist, because a way you can define God is just whatever you put as most important, and that there's always going to be a thing that someone puts as most important. Maybe it's Jesus Christ, maybe it's Allah, maybe it's whoever, and maybe it's yourself. Maybe it's your close friends. Whatever it is, there's a thing that people make the most important thing in their life. And whatever that is their God.
The gist of it, I mean, I think it's very relevant. So we have this term we call nafs. It's written N-A-F-S. It's kind of like, your inner ego that's in you, that you should resist to be a prisoner of that nafs, because it's always has the potential to think of itself as God, right? And take over, and that's part of where your pride, your selfishness and all of this
our new church term for that's called the proprium. I think it's the same sort of thing.
There's this very sort of focused attention on like disciplining yourself, your nafs, right, so that you don't fall prey to it. Of course, in the Muslim sort of version, like God creates Adam and asks the angels to prostrate before Adam, right, and then the angels they they follow through. But the Satan, which is not an angel in the Muslim version, says, why would I prostrate before this new thing that you created? You made him from clay, whereas I am from fire, right? So this sort of pride, and over there too, like we have this freedom to choose was there, right? And anyways, I mean, long story, like it would take us hours to go through it. But what I found very relevant in how you were explaining it is like how you started with this the freedom to choose, right? In the Quran, God often like talks about would you not think, right? Or says things and then says I am telling you this so that you reflect on it to people. Actually, I mean, to connect it with this sermon thing. I give this 30, 35 minute whatever sermons, and then it's not an obligation but very customary to read this one verse from the Quran when you finish at the very end of your sermon. And I feel like every time I've done all this talking, and then I could have just said this very short verse and it would have been
would sum it all up,
right? So it's something like in the Arabic it says إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. تذكرون means to reflect, right? So God commands justice, doing good and generosity towards relatives. He forbids what is shameful, blameworthy, and oppressive. He teaches you so that you may take heed. So over there's not only like a summary of what I tried to say, but also this ending, which tells people I'm telling you this. It's not merely like a point that I'm making. I expect you to follow through with it, but I am telling you to reflect on it and then adopt it, right? And I think the presence of evil, in Islam too, comes from that choice that we have the good and the bad, and we are here. If we are here to recognize God and not to sort of be gods of ourselves, then that evil and good exists, and through exercising of that choice, you have an appreciation of God and knowing God and getting to God. So I mean, I think it's very, very relevant. So I mean, like the parallels are just striking, and I often find it very instructive to listen to like intellectuals from these different faith traditions exchange with one another. It can be very eye-opening. In my long drives, I sometimes try to tune into these, including the Spiritable podcast.
So a question about that, and to get in. So something I really like about my faith, New Church teachings, is that this idea of the selfishness that is where origin springs from. If we put that above God, it doesn't define love of self as innately evil. It defines it as evil if it is out of order, if it's above God. If we love ourselves more than God, that's a bad thing. Yeah. But it also talks about love of yourself as sort of the foundation on which higher loves are built. Babies love themselves because they don't know anything else. All they know is I need to survive, I need to take care of myself. And as we grow, hopefully we build love for our family, we build love for our friends, we build love for our community, we build love for God.
Sure.
So in that sense, the same thing that we can use to generate evil is also sort of the foundation of, in the right use, the foundation of how we are good. Do you find with like the nafs that you were talking about, there's a similar sense there? Or if not, what is why did God, according to Islam, give humanity that?
I may ask you to reformulate the question. What
This is kind of a long question.
No. I mean, and I apologize for that.
No.
To put it this way, right? Your nest being there, and you having this relationship with God, always recognizing God and being mindful of God, and not replacing yourself with that, not going astray in that hierarchy, is the main thing.
But you can change your nafs?
Yeah, so you can discipline your nafs, right? So different, some ascetics, different people have found ways of, remembrance of God, your prayers, and all of this are ways for you to engage with it, with your nafs, and to discipline it in a way.
So that you're in control of it and it's not in control of you?
Yeah, so you are in control of it, but you are in control of it through recognizing God and through being in relationship with God.
I like that.
That's the sort of the idea behind, say, the 5 daily prayers. For us, it's going to be we are going to have this continuous struggle to continue to try to recognize God and know God and get closer to God, and you'll have this nafs that's going to be your struggle in that. If that wasn't there, recognizing and knowing God wouldn't be your test in this earth, right? I don't know if that answers any part of your question.
That did.
Deeper than what I said, but yeah.
Yeah, this has been so fascinating. It's awesome seeing how much it's lined up. It has been amazing. I mean, the origin of evil is, I think that the new church lands much more in agreement with Islam on the origin of evil, at least the way that we both brought our faiths to light, than we do with other branches of Christianity.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's true.
Oh yeah, this has been so cool.
Yeah, and I really. But before we end, I have my favorite game.
Okay.
And I was worried when we did this with Rabbi Leah that she wasn't going to like it. So if you don't like it, we don't have to do it.
No.
But we went through with her. She's Jewish, and
you watched this episode, right?
Yeah.
Did you watch till the end?
I
put you on the spot right now. Did you watch the whole thing?
No, I don't think I watched the whole thing.
So at the end of the episode, we played a game called How Jewish is the New Church?
Oh, okay.
And so we went through our top 10 tenets of the new church, and she just gave like a yes or no, basically. And by the end, we found out that we're 60% Jewish. Oh. So it's not perfect, but it's fun to kind of just see on a very external level. Right. So we'll see how Muslim we are, how Islamic the new church is.
Can I say the caveat that I am not a trained, clergy, and so if I get something wrong, I don't want to get your score messed up. So just for that.
Now this is going down. This is permanent in history.
You are representing all of Islam right now, so no pressure.
Okay, do you have any guesses how we're going to do before?
The first one's going to be a struggle.
The first one's going to be a
struggle.
Okay, so here are our main tenets, and you can just say yes or no, or give a little explanation if you want. So our number 1, the Lord Jesus Christ is the one loving God. No. You don't have to feel bad about saying no.
You're so disappointed.
That touched me. Okay, number 2, the Bible is God speaking through literal stories and a systematic inner meaning.
It's not a yes and no, because...
Maybe half a point.
Yeah, so you do, because Muslims believe in the Bible,
right.
The Old Testament and the New Testament as true message of God. We just believe that later on human element was added into it. So that version no, but there are very similar passages in the Quran and the Bible. So I'll take that as a yes.
You take that as a yes?
Formally yes. Okay. And if we substitute Bible for Quran, then there's no problem, right?
But we can't really do that.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So, number 3. So we're 1 of 2 right now. Number 3. Love is the basis of Scripture.
Love is the basis of Scripture. Yeah. So, the Scripture is, according to Muslim belief, from God as a guidance to humanity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're on board with that.
So that's God's love in.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
2.
Yeah.
Number 4. Life after death, which we didn't really get into a lot. Life after death, heaven, and angels are all real.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. Next one,
Nice.
number 5. Salvation is progressive and involves an ongoing process of spiritual growth. I feel like we're on the same level there.
I think so. I mean, I find it, the discourse on salvation is deeper in Christianity in some ways.
It's a
So, I mean, are you like referring to like, someone like,
the kind of the ability to go to heaven. Like being a
yeah.
good person is a process. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Progressive.
we see salvation as not something that happens to a person.
it's
Like
not.
no one saves you. You save yourself by living a good life. So that's what this is sort
Yeah,
of
and
referring to.
salvation and save is a very like
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, so
hot
I mean,
word, but-
according to Islam, it's totally between you and God, and it's your relationship with God. That's
yeah, we're with that. Okay, we're taking it.
All right.
Okay, next one's
That's 4.
next one's gonna be a no. God came to earth as Jesus Christ to overcome the power of evil.
Yeah. No.
That's a no.
You said yeah first. I don't know.
All right, number 7. Happiness comes when we let God inspire our daily work and our service to others.
Yeah.
Nice.
Boom, there we go.
Of course.
Next one, 8. God endows us with the capacity to choose our eternal destiny. So God gives us, the ability to choose
To
our
choose
destiny,
between
where we-
right
where we
and
go.
wrong, which cumulatively
Yeah,
translates.
to
Yeah.
our-
All right.
killing it. Next one. Oh, this is we didn't talk about this much, but marriage love, like married love, can become spiritual and continue on to eternity.
So yeah, we believe that
Yeah.
in the afterlife, in heaven, people are married to another person forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that continues. I mean, marriage in Islam is very much like a spiritual, a religious thing for both couples to sort of nourish one another towards hopefully a God's conscious, path. So along with other stuff.
So do you think in the afterlife people are have married partners?
So
Like
that's something that I'm not totally. I think so. I mean, I think so. Yeah,
Should we give half
because
a point?
a full point because we have a prayer, right? So we say that, so God, unite us with our prophet and our loved ones in the hereafter. So that's. I think so. I mean, I
So
check with like.
So do you feel like when you die that you'll be with your wife in the next?
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, I would hope so.
I think a lot of people
Yeah,
would.
yeah.
All right, we're taking it.
All right.
10. Heaven is for all who love God and live according to His commandments.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, that's pretty good. What was
Yeah,
that?
that puts us at
80?
80%.
80%.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
I think so.
There we go, in history.
And of course, my understanding is that I'm very easy to say yes. I mean, I'm just trying to say that, these terminologies, right, the way that we employ them, have like, a lot of deeper engagement with
Right.
them.
Yeah.
So yeah, our
And
yes
I
answers
mean,
are-
and I love the game, but it just, made me realize, and the reason I love it is, like when you say, human beings are to love God. If you love God and follow His commandments, then
Yeah,
you're in
that's
heaven,
yeah.
right? Yes, but I mean, I am also, asking, is my way of understanding and loving God, like, are you guys like understanding the same thing from that same
Right.
terminology?
So we probably have different
like,
nuances.
Yeah.
to
So
how
those
we do these
nuances, right?
things.
I mean, they are all like subjects to be studied, to be like collectively
Yeah.
thought about, and
Yeah. Well, and I think
to be
there's a-
talked about as well.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, I
there's
mean, I
a-
love the game. It just tells me that, hey, like some of these things, because when I am maybe hesitating, I'm like asking, are we understanding the same thing from the same concept, and
I'm thinking
things
the
like
same
that.
thing, yeah.
But I think we are at large, so it just
Yeah,
made me
and I think
realize
that at large is really important.
Yeah.
And I think we have like both of us have so many distinct spiritual like nuanced things that we keep hitting on, and there are tons we haven't talked about.
Yeah.
But I do like boiling it down to these basic sort of beliefs, because I think there's a real use in that to show that at the end of the day, like we are on the same team.
Indeed.
Like we want people to live a good life, be good people, be good to those around them, to love God, whatever you call him, and just better yourself every day. And like that's a very simple thing, but we both agree on it. And like that's in a way as important as these very nuanced like digressions on where evil comes from.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to come back to sort of this holistic outlook.
And I think so. It's so interesting that I think most religions have a very, very similar foundation. You know, like the big overarching goals of those religions are all very similar. Mm-hmm. And yet in practice, people have different ways of expressing their faith. Mm-hmm. And it can look really, really drastically different. And it's so interesting that we let the expression divide instead of noticing like the goal. Yeah. Because I think everyone realizes that the people they connect with most are people that want the same things as them.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you get along better with people that want the same thing as you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yet we, especially in a religious context, look at people that want the same thing as us, that just express it differently, and are like, oh no, I can't get along with that person.
Yeah.
They're so different from me. And it's like,
no, indeed.
No, they're not. They're not that different.
Yeah.
It's really, really fascinating.
No, exactly. I mean, you're right. I feel like, I hope, there was like, more expressions like this.
So yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. It was awesome getting to talk to you, getting to know you.
This was wonderful. I mean, I hope, we can do another one down the line.
Down the road. Right. We'd love to have you back sometime.
Should we end it with a question that I warned him about?
Oh, no, I think we're past that point.
All right.
We talked about a lot of great
spiritual things.
All right. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, so thank you guys for listening and tuning in to the Spiritable podcast. Feel free to download a podcast wherever you find them, on TuneIn, Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, whatever there is these days. We're up there. Or check us out on YouTube for the video podcast. Always fun stuff. And if you have questions, comment them wherever you can, or email us at spiritablepodcast@gmail.com. Did I cover all the bases?
Yeah, you didn't leave anything for me to say, but that's fine.
I just did right there. Ahmed, do you have anything you want to plug or like invite people to? Or
no, yeah. I mean, I can mention my email, which is atekelioglu@cair.com. If anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot me an email.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much, and tune in next time.